There is a building in Rome that has been standing for almost 1900 years. Its dome is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome on the planet. No steel rebar, no modern additives, no repair crews patching cracks every decade. Just ancient concrete, and it's still perfectly intact. Now here's what should completely stop you in your tracks. Modern concrete structures built in marine environments, seawalls, harbor piers, coastal foundations, start visibly deteriorating within 50 years. The engineers who designed them knew this. They planned for it. Mid-20th century design standards actually assumed a concrete structure would need significant repair or replacement within 50 years of construction. And yet, Roman harbor piers that have been sitting underwater, fully submerged in the Mediterranean Sea for 2,000 years are not just intact, they are stronger today than the day they were poured. I want you to sit with that for a second. Not preserved, not maintained, not lucky survivors, stronger. The seawater didn't destroy them. The seawater made them better. This is not mythology. This is not legend. This is the finding of peer-reviewed research published in respected scientific journals by teams from MIT, Harvard University, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and institutions across Italy and Switzerland. And the question that follows, the one that should genuinely unsettle you, isn't just how did they do it? The question is, how did we forget? Because what happened here isn't just a fascinating footnote in construction history. It's a case study in how much we've underestimated ancient human ingenuity. And it has direct consequences for the world you and I are living in right now. So let's explore this right now. To understand why Roman concrete is so extraordinary, you first need to understand what modern concrete actually does and why it fails. When you pour modern concrete, the binding agent is something called Portland cement. Portland cement is essentially the glue that holds everything together. Now, Portland cement works well, incredibly well actually. We use roughly 19 billion tons of concrete every single year across the planet. It builds our roads, our bridges, our buildings, our seawalls. But here's the issue. When modern concrete cracks, and it always cracks eventually, that crack becomes an open invitation. Water seeps in. In marine environments, that water is salt water. Salt is corrosive. It attacks the internal structure of the concrete. It attacks the steel reinforcement bars inside. And once that steel begins to rust, it expands, which creates more cracking, which lets in more water. It is a death spiral built directly into the material. Modern concrete in marine environments doesn't just age, it actively destroys itself from the inside out. Now, compare that to what researchers found when they examined 2,000-year-old Roman underwater structures pulled from sites along the Bay of Naples. The structures weren't decaying, there was no corrosion cascade. Instead, researchers found rare interlocking mineral crystals growing inside the Roman concrete, minerals that don't exist in modern Portland cement at all. These minerals, called altobermarite and philipsite, had been slowly forming inside the Roman concrete for 2 millennia. Not just filling in cracks, not just patching damage, they were actively growing, interlocking, and reinforcing the internal structure of the material over time. The seawater that modern engineers desperately try to keep out of concrete was actually being used by Roman concrete as a building material. Research published in the American Mineralogist journal described it this way. As seawater percolated through the ancient harbor structures, it dissolved components of the volcanic ash embedded in the mix, and those dissolved minerals then recrystallized inside the concrete's gaps as these harder, more interlocked crystalline structures. The result was a material that, genuinely, got stronger with age. And because Roman concrete didn't use steel reinforcement, there was no rusting cycle to trigger, no internal expansion, no self-destruction. The Romans had accidentally or deliberately, we're about to get to that, engineered concrete that worked with its environment instead of against it. But what everyone wanted to know was how. What was actually in this concrete that made this possible? And why had we spent over a century using a completely different formula? This is where the story gets even more interesting. For years, researchers assumed the key ingredient was a specific type of volcanic ash called pozzolana, named after the coastal town of Pozzuoli near Naples where it was sourced. Ancient Roman engineers actually documented this. Vitruvius, who served as an engineer under Emperor Augustus, wrote about it. Pliny the Elder described it. They knew this particular volcanic ash from the Bay of Naples region produced exceptional concrete, especially from maritime structures. They shipped this ash across the entire empire specifically to use in construction. So when modern scientists first analyzed Roman concrete, they said, it's the volcanic ash, that's the secret. And they weren't wrong. The volcanic ash is critical. But there's a layer to this story that nobody had fully cracked until a research team led by Professor Admir Masic at MIT started looking more carefully. They noticed something strange in the Roman concrete samples. Scattered throughout the material were tiny, bright white mineral chunks, millimeter scale, calcium-rich. Scientists had seen them before and basically dismissed them. The assumption was sloppy mixing. The thought was that Roman workers had simply not mixed their lime thoroughly enough, leaving behind these little unmixed lumps, a sign of poor quality control. But Masic couldn't let that explanation go. If the Romans put so much effort into making an outstanding construction material, he said, following all of the detailed recipes that had been optimized over many centuries, why would they put so little effort into mixing it properly? It didn't add up. So his team used high-resolution, multi-scale imaging and chemical mapping, essentially extremely powerful microscopic analysis, to study these lime clasts in extraordinary detail. And what they found completely rewrote the story. Those white chunks weren't impurities, they were a feature. Here's what the MIT team concluded. When Roman engineers mixed their concrete, they weren't just using regular slaked lime, which is lime that has been combined with water first to form a paste. They were using quicklime, a far more chemically reactive and extremely hot form of lime, and they were mixing it directly into the volcanic ash and aggregate while it was hot. This process is called hot mixing, and the MIT study published in the journal Science Advances in January 2023 identified it as the critical mechanism behind Roman concrete's extraordinary self-healing durability. Here's what happens in hot mixing and why it matters so much. When you mix quicklime directly with volcanic ash and seawater at high temperatures, you're triggering a set of chemical reactions that are simply impossible at lower temperatures. The extreme heat creates specific compounds that only form under those conditions. And as the mixture cools and cures, those little white calcium-rich clasts, the ones scientists had dismissed as poor mixing, become tiny, brittle reservoirs of calcium, packed in throughout the concrete, just sitting there. Now here's where the self-healing mechanism kicks in, and honestly, this is crazy. When a tiny crack begins to form in the concrete, which happens in any material under stress, that crack starts traveling through the weakest paths in the material. And what does it run into? Those lime clasts. The crack hits a clast. The brittle calcium-rich structure fractures, and calcium is immediately released into the crack. That calcium reacts with any moisture present, including seawater, and recrystallizes as calcium carbonate. In other words, the crack fills itself in, spontaneously, automatically, without any human intervention. And if the crack reaches volcanic ash particles in the surrounding concrete, it triggers additional chemical reactions that create even more binding material. The MIT team didn't just theorize this, they actually proved it experimentally. They created samples of hot mixed concrete using the ancient Roman recipe. They deliberately crocked the samples. They ran water through the cracks. Within 2 weeks, the cracks had completely sealed. Water that had been flowing through the cracks stopped flowing entirely. Then they tested an identical concrete sample made without the quicklime hot mixing technique. That sample never healed. The water kept flowing through. The crack just stayed open. 2 weeks. That's all it took. The reality is the Romans had developed a material that performs something closer to biology than engineering. Living tissue heals. Roman concrete heals. Modern Portland cement just cracks and stays cracked. Now, here's what completely floored me when I went deep on this. This wasn't a secret they kept hidden. It was written down. Vitruvius and Pliny documented the volcanic ash. They described where to source it. They described the mixing process. These texts survived. But somewhere in the transition to modern Portland cement, this knowledge was lost or ignored. And we spent roughly 150 years building concrete infrastructure that we already knew would fail within decades. Bridges on borrowed time, seawalls counting down, harbor structures slowly being eaten alive, and all along, Roman piers were getting stronger. I think about this, and I keep coming back to one question. How badly did we underestimate these people? A material that doesn't just resist its environment, a material that uses its environment to become stronger. The Pantheon doesn't need a repair crew. Your city's bridge probably already has one scheduled. There's a lesson in that gap, a very old, very important, incredibly timely one. If this is the kind of investigation you've been looking for, then you are exactly where you need to be. This is OBSCURA Files. Every case we open starts with the same question. How badly have we underestimated ancient human beings? And every time we dig into the evidence, the answer is more than we thought. Subscribe right now so you don't miss the next file. And if this made you think, share it, because the truth was always buried. We just finally have the tools to dig it up.